Thank you so much, Michael, for the warm introduction. I'm going to get started with sharing my screen. And while I do so, I want to invite people to also share their names, where you're coming from, and your current role in the chat box, just so that we can begin to cultivate a little bit of a virtual community here. So it'd be great to see where everyone is coming from. Uh-oh. All right. So I'm gonna get started. I just want to make sure that everyone can see my screen. And if you're looking at it, it should be the title slide. Thank you, Vandine, for information. So good morning to everyone. Thank you so much again to the Cornwall Center for the invitation to present my work and research. And thank you so much to everyone who is here today. It's wonderful to be in virtual community to you all. As Michael introduced, my name is Jamelia Harris. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm currently a postdoctoral research fellow at the Joseph C. Cornwall Center. And today I'll be presenting a little bit about my research and focus, which intersectionality and youth voice can be implemented in school discipline reform, particularly as we are considering the experiences and narratives of Black girls in urban schools. And before I begin, I just want to share a little bit of common language that I'll be using throughout the presentation. Probably familiar with Monique Morris, who has really catalyzed this focus on Black girls. And so I'll be using her definition of school push-out, which defines the collection of policies, practices, and consciousness that facilitates criminalization within educational contexts and settings for Black girls. So to just provide an overview of how I envision that we'll spend the next 60 minutes, I'll be sharing a little bit of background context about my work. I'll also be sharing about my current research with the Concrete Rose Project, which is a co-created Black girl research group that I created alongside Black girls in my community. And I'll be discussing some of the practical implications and applications of the girls' narratives of the Concrete Rose projects. And then I imagine that we'll have about 15 minutes designated for questions and comments at the end. And so I first, as a Black feminist scholar, it's always important for me to begin with orienting myself and orienting my positionality in the work. And so I start out by addressing the ways in which I approach this work, which is deeply rooted in my lived experiences as a Black woman from a working poor immigrant family background who has been a student, community-based educator, researcher and consultant, and also a community organizer in K-12 urban school settings, and who's witnessed the brunt of educational inequality, including the school to prison pipeline or school push out and mass incarceration impact Black girls in my community. And these various lived experiences continue to shape my work in and outside of academia, which is committed to transforming the public discourses on the gender dimensions of the school to prison pipeline or school to prison nexus, whichever your preference is, as well as police brutality and state violence. And just to share a little bit more context about myself, prior to joining the Cornwall Center, I actually was a research associate on a statewide school discipline study that examined the impact of school discipline reform initiatives across the state of California, including restorative justice and PBIS, or positive behavioral intervention support. And in doing this work, oftentimes when I would meet the school principal or any kind of school administrator and introduce myself as a scholar who focuses specifically on the experiences of Black girls with regard to school discipline, the immediate reaction that I would receive is either, one, we have a problem with our Black girls and we need your help. They're involved in fighting or some other kind of aspect of specific challenges that they're experiencing with their Black girls. And the second reaction that I would often receive when introducing myself in that way is, why Black girls? And this response typically was oriented towards this prevailing awareness about the specific challenges that face Black boys when we're thinking about school discipline, and how oftentimes when we think of who the victims or prime students that are impacted by racial disparities in school discipline, the first image that often comes into mind is Black boys. And even when we are engaging in conversations about police brutality, there tends to be this male-centric framework about state violence and school punishment. And so these various reactions highlight the ways in which I approach my work through an intersectional framework. And so I just want to begin with this definition of intersectionality from Kimberly Crenshaw, really at the forefront of these current movements around expanding the public awareness about the gender dimensions of anti-Black state violence, as well as anti-Black school discipline practices. And she says that intersectionality is a necessary lens when we're thinking about social justice issues, and especially when we're thinking about these in the context of anti-racist movements, because without having this kind of paradigm, we can't understand the experiences of Black girls who are simultaneously impacted by structures of racism, racial oppression, as well as they're impacted by structures of gender oppression. And so she writes that intersectionality is a lens through which we can see the ways in which power comes and collides, where it interlocks and intersects. It's not simply that there is a race problem here and a gender problem here, or a class problem there, or an LGBTQ problem there, because many times those frameworks erase what happened to people who are subject to all of those things. And so when we look at school discipline inequities from this sort of race aggregate lens, we oftentimes miss the specific challenges that Black girls are faced due to these intersecting locations of race and gender. And even more nuanced is these added dimensions when we examine the impact of race, gender, and disability, or race, gender, and sexuality. We know that students who are labeled as disabled, or students who are considered to be gender nonconforming or queer, are differently impacted by school discipline, and often are more represented in discipline inequities when we take that intersectional lens. And so through my work, I apply intersectionality as a framework to highlight the overrepresentation of Black girls. And we know that Black girls are actually overrepresented along every single aspect of the school to prison continuum. And this is across each state in the US, that Black girls are suspended more often than white girls when we take this disaggregate lens. And this includes New Jersey, which is home to a literal school to prison pipeline, where Black girls are overrepresented among the school discipline population, as well as the population of incarcerated youth. And then when we examine through an intersectional lens some of the national discourses, we see that Black girls are often, beyond school suspensions, they're often subject to state violence and police brutality in their school spaces. And we see these narratives in the media of Black girls who are being tossed across their classrooms and snatched out of their desks because they refuse to give up their cell phones, or strip searched because they appear to be giddy. And even this recent example of Kaya Roll, who was a 6-year-old Black girl that was actually arrested for throwing a temper tantrum in her kindergarten classrooms. And all of these different experiences point to a broader phenomenon, which I will talk about in a bit, called adultification, that this particular type of anti-Black racism that contributes to the erasure of Black girls' childhood. And so while completing my dissertation research, I decided to return to a high school in my home community that I refer to throughout this presentation as Desert Rose High School, after learning that Black girls in my neighborhood were being suspended at a rate of over 19%. And Desert Rose High School is located in Southern California, and some statistics about their discipline challenges are that Black girls represent 30% of the cumulative female student enrollment, yet they represent 55% of the girls who are receiving suspensions. We know that these stark discipline inequities fit within a noticeable pattern of how Black girls are more likely to be suspended, expelled, arrested, and subjected to police brutality at higher rates in schools across the nation. And so in doing this work with Black girls, I wanted to conduct an intrinsic case study to explore the contours of Black girls' school pushout in urban schools. So I'm going to talk a bit about the literature. My research rests in the body of literature that focuses on the criminalization of Black girlhood, which is often initiated by the persistence of anti-Black logics and stereotypes that are rooted in chattel slavery. These ideas that Black girls are not childlike perpetuate a phenomenon called adultification, which can cause Black girls as young as 5 years old to be perceived by adults as less innocent and more adult-like than white girls. And the erasure of Black girls' innocence and need for protection shapes the ways in which these young girls are oftentimes problematized and pushed out into the school to prison pipeline through punitive policies and practices. And we know that also these experiences can be exacerbated for Black girls due to the added dimensions of class and geography, which inform how students are policed and punished in urban school settings, right? There's tends to be this over focus on public safety in urban communities, and specifically when thinking about poor Black folks that shapes the ways in which these girls are encountering zero tolerance mechanisms in their school, as well as the ways in which these girls are encountering police in their neighborhoods and other contexts. And my research sought to address a gap in the current research that has not yet considered Black girls' perspectives of how they are experiencing discipline, and also this lack of youth action research that has existed within this body of work. And so through my research, I wanted to understand how Black girls were experiencing exclusionary punishments and how they lived and interpreted racial, gender, discipline, and inequities. And I also want to understand how their insights could offer guidance into how we can transform unjust school structures. And so these two research questions guided my study. The first is, how do Black girls describe and understand their school discipline experiences as shaped by the intersectionality of race, gender, class, and geography? And the second was, in what ways does an after-school youth action research group allow for Black girls' meaning making about their individual and collective schooling experiences? So I want to take a step back to first conceptualize the ways in which I define youth action in my work, and in a forthcoming book project entitled Black Girlhood Methodologies, I introduced this method that I've referred to as Black Girlhood Participatory Action Research, which draws from Black feminist thought and critical race feminism, and its emphasis on lived experience and dialogue as a way of creating meaning, constructing meaning. BGPAR seeks to create opportunities for girls to individually and collectively develop critical insights about their schooling experiences as well as identities. And in this way, Black Girl Participatory Action Research seeks to position Black girls as critical research partners in developing and carrying out research to advance anti-racism in urban schools by examining inequities from the perspectives of students who themselves are experiencing these challenges. And so BGPAR involves 4 essential phases. In the first phase, I co-constructed a research and inquiry group alongside Black girls at a high school in my community. In the second phase of BGPAR, I conducted bi-weekly meetings on the high school campus with a diverse group of 9th to 12th grade Black girls. And I also facilitated sister circles or kitchen table talks about their racialized and gendered schooling experiences with these girls. And then in the third phase, we collectively analyzed the data from our conversations and interviews together and identified salient themes or patterns. And then the final stage, we developed a presentation to present to school leaders and educators, and the girls were invited to participate in this presentation as well. And so, as I mentioned, the first phase of BG-PAR involved formalizing a research inquiry group alongside girls, and we naming it the Concrete Rose Project. And just to give context about that name for the girls, the Concrete Rose Project symbolized the ways in which someone could be oppressed, but still find a way to blossom and bloom throughout all of these hardships. And throughout the group, we commonly reflected on some of the ways in which these girls were identifying roses, buds, and thorns in their own lives and in their own journeys, and how these different experiences continue to shape their educational aspirations and motivation to persist in school, even though they were experiencing school punishment in the ways that they were. I'm going to breeze through some of these slides so that I can get to the meat of the presentation, which is these girls' narratives. But I just want to quickly pay a nod to some of the people who shaped my work theoretically, and that was guided by Black feminist thought, theories of Black girlhood studies, as well as theories of anti-Black racism, to analyze the ways in which multiple interlocking systems of race, class, gender, and age oppression simultaneously shape Black girls' marginalization in school systems and in society. And I also want to quickly cover some of the other methods that I focus on, though throughout this presentation, I will be sharing data from the youth action component. The project also, my research also included narrative inquiry and critical ethnography. And so I did participant observations of the Concrete Rose project group sessions. I also conducted semi-structured interviews with a purposive sample of 15 girls, as well as educators who were all involved in interacting with Black girls in the study, or who were involved in the discipline process in some way. So this included the school principal, as well as the PBIS staff at the school. And I also engaged creative methods. And so I share some examples of the methods that were included in the Concrete Rose Project, which includes educational journey mapping, as well as some art-based critical reflection assignments that ask the girls to reflect on their discipline experiences. And then I, of course, want to share a little bit about the Concrete Rose Project research partners. Each of these girls self-identified as Black girls. They were all between the grade levels of 9th and 12th grade, and they all had experienced suspension on one or more occasion, but some of the girls had additional experiences, including being expelled, being arrested, and there were several girls who reported experiencing physical force by school security or police, which typically occurred when these girls were involved in fights or attempting to fight another student. And then they all came from a diverse academic background. Some of the girls were involved in all regular track course, some were involved in all honors coursework, and some of them were involved in the mixture of the two. And so it's very important to highlight that, because oftentimes when we talk about school discipline, we think about the students who are academically disengaged, but a lot of the girls who were a part of this project were very much passionate about school and passionate about learning. And then I also want to just share a little bit about Desert Rose High School, that it was a Title I high school in an urban intensive setting in Southern California, and that 88% of the students were identified as socioeconomically disadvantaged, with 35% identifying as Black and 60% identifying as Latinx. And as I mentioned, the school was involved in several ongoing discipline reform efforts to address racial discipline inequities. And this included implementing PBIS as a response. However, this did not come up in any of the student interviews or conversations. And oftentimes when the girls mentioned PBIS, they often described it as another form of punitive discipline. For example, girls had described being referred to the PBIS room because they had gotten in trouble for talking too much in class. And so it was another form of punishment to these girls. And so now I'm going to dive into my findings, or the girls' findings, which encompasses their narratives. And I've organized these thematically, but I really want to emphasize that this presentation is about the ways in which the girls were conceptualizing their school discipline experiences. And what I found was that these girls were conceptualizing the connection between racial, gender, discipline inequities and the macro level context of gendered anti-Black racism. And so the first finding concerned the ways in which these girls understood how anti-Black stereotypes were essential to the ways that violence was routinized against Black girls. And so the girls would often highlight the role of dehumanizing and reductive stereotypes and describe the ways that this determined how school staff evaluated, interacted with, and punished Black girls. And in particular, the Concrete Rose girls suggested that because Black girls were more likely to be subject to punitive punishments because adults stereotyped them as ghetto, which was a racialized, gendered, and class stereotype, according to these girls. And when I asked the girls in conversations how being a Black girl affects their schooling experiences at Desert Rose High School, they often immediately described the ways that being perceived as a ghetto Black girl was significant in how culturally deficit practices and punitive policies were enacted against them in ways that perpetuated their marginalization. And so the first narrative that I want to share is from a Black girl named Dejanay, who was actually an assistant in the school's main administrative office. And she shared with me, I know that the way that they look at Black girls, just from me hearing them talk, is that they look at us as being loud, ghetto fights. If you got a fight with a Black girl and a white girl or a Hispanic girl, most likely they're going to say that the Black girl started the fight, so she'll get suspended longer. And this statement from Dejanay really points back to the adultification of Black girls that I mentioned before, and the ways that Black girls are often positioned as more threatening, as more adult-like, and thus subject to more severe punitive consequences than non-Black girls, and particularly white girls. And so Dejanay was drawing on her experiences as a Black girl who has worked in the office and has overheard these conversations around Black girls' discipline experiences to come to this conclusion that Black girls are suspended longer because they're perceived as ghetto, loud, and fighters. And so this would mean that they would automatically be assumed to be the instigator of any kind of conflict. And so during one of our final group sessions, I presented data trends that captured the school's suspension rates for Black girls relative to other schools in the district. And I asked the girls to write down some of the root causes or explanations that they could come up with around why Black girls at their school were suspended at such severe rates relative to these other high schools, but also relative to other non-Black girls in their high school. And going along with the theme of what Dejanay shared in the previous vignette excerpt, Ashley states, my number one reason was because they see us as a danger, which I feel like is true. They see us as a threat. And then Tiara, who was also a 12th grade Black girl, interjects saying that that was the first one that she wrote down as well. And Ashley explains that because they stereotype us, they want to call us ghetto. They've never formed any kind of relationship with us or seen us before. They don't know us, but they assume that we're all the same. And so this reflected a common theme that came up in my conversations with Black girls, is that they would often describe these very specific stereotypes and narratives that they believed that adults and educators believed about them. And when I would ask them if adults actually had called them ghetto outwardly or explicitly described them in these ways, the girls would often immediately reply, no, they don't have to. But it's based on their vibe and their energy. And this was very significant because the girls were describing the ways that everyday interactions with their educators were communicating to them that these educators were stereotyping them and viewing them in very culturally deficit ways that affected how they were treating them in the classroom context. And so the next finding that I'll discuss concerns the ways that these girls were discussing how school policies and practices were institutionalized in ways that perpetuate violence against Black girls. And so though the school discipline policies and practices often purport to be race and gender neutral, the Black girls in the Concrete Rose Project often describe being differently surveilled and discriminatorily targeted for behaviors as a result of zero tolerance mechanisms of punishment, which the students conceptualize as rules that only attack Black girls. Among this list of rules and practices included experiencing longer suspensions for fighting and the disproportionate use of physical force when school security were engaged in stopping fights between Black girls. The girls often described disproportionate experiences of dress code violations, including dress code policies that targeted their body type or dress code policies that targeted them for head wearing cultural head wraps. And the girls often described disproportionately being punished for subjective offenses like being perceived as too loud or appearing to have an attitude. And overall, their narratives illuminated the ways that these youth were conceptualizing how gendered anti-Black racism can create an interpretive climate that informs the implementation and enforcement of school discipline policies. And so the first narrative that I want to share is from TT, who describes specifically her experiences with dress code. She says that when Latina girls or white girls wear crop tops, they don't say nothing. But if a Black girl wears a crop top, it's like, change out of your clothes and stuff like that, because we have more shape. Like, they make us not have confidence in ourselves because they stop us from wearing it more than others. They'll make you feel like we don't look right or our bodies look disgusting, but Latina girls and white girls are fine. And this narrative from TT reflected a very common theme in the data, which is that girls often describe dress code as being one of the most significant racial gender inequities that they observed in school discipline policies and practices, in the ways that Black girls were policed and surveilled differently from not only white girls, but also from non-Black girls of color when wearing specific clothing items. And the notion around crop tops being perceived as something that is more serious when Black girls wear it relates also to the adultification phenomenon and points to the ways that Black girls are often differently hypersexualized because of these historical tropes around Black femininity that construct the ways in which their bodies are viewed and policed in contemporary society. And so when the girls were describing their experiences of school dress code violations, they often highlighted the ways that this was a sexually violent experience for them, because oftentimes it was under the gaze of white men who were security officers or male educators who were, as one of the girls said, called out, were saying that their choice of dress was a distraction to the learning environment. And so this notion that their bodies were perceived as distractions in the learning environment was something that was deeply concerning for a lot of the girls who I interviewed. And the girls also, this excerpt also really highlights the harmful impact that dress code policies have on the self-esteem of Black girls. The idea that a Black girl can receive a dress code violation and internalize that as a message that something is wrong with her body, or that something that her body, quote unquote, looks disgusting because she is being differently surveilled, really highlights the urgency of us addressing the disproportionate enforcement of dress code policies that these girls were describing. And the final finding of my research looked at the ways that Black girls were engaging in the Concrete Rose Project group as a way to speak back against oppressive policies and practices and to collectively envision a more just school system. And this vision included gender responsive programming, Black girl spaces, and educators and school leaders who emboldened Black girls' intersectional identities and prioritized building compassionate relationships with these girls over punishing them. And so I want to share some responses that the girls came up with when I posed a general question of how they felt that their school could address school discipline and better support the success and well-being of Black girls. And so these reflect some of the common themes. The first concerned Black girl spaces and gender responsive programming. Micaiah, who was a 12th grade Black girl, states, well, like the stuff that we're doing here, the Concrete Rose Project, we need more groups for girls, or we need to have things that would bring people who are into contact that could help us solve all of the drama. Now we get suspended for fighting, and then we come back and the drama is still there. And so we just need a place to talk and stuff. And I feel like that would help a lot more just hearing them. That probably is the problem too. Like, we can't talk at home, and then it's still the same thing at school. So it's like no one is caring. And so Micaiah highlights something that I've heard from Black girls across multiple schools, is that we are being suspended for fighting, and it's not effective. We will find another way to fight. And we also aren't being provided the skill sets to work through our conflict with other girls in a way that doesn't involve violence. And so thinking about what kinds of programmatic interventions can be created to facilitate these girls through the developing those social emotional skill sets that would equip them with the resources to navigate conflict with other girl students, but also facilitate the space for these girls to discuss their challenges with other girls, and in a way that is facilitated by an adult that is really providing them with the guidance of how they can address their conflicts with other students. The second theme I titled the Treat Black Girls Like Children, and the girls were calling out the need for compassion over zero tolerance. When I asked TT how the school could address discipline inequities for Black girls, she responded, they could do what they do to other kids. They can listen to us. They could believe us. Like, not all of us be lying. They don't have to just suspend you. They could work with us. They just suspend us. For some other races, they talk to them, they give them chances. For Black girls, it's, oh, you're suspended, go home. We don't have the same advantage that they have. And this excerpt reminds me of a story of a Black girl that I interviewed who had told me that by the time that she had finished her first year of high school, that she had already encountered her first court referral and ticket because she was searched by security and they found a mace in her backpack. When I asked this young girl whether or not she knew that mace was a violation of the school's discipline policy, she responded, no. But I choose to walk home with mace every day because I know that there have been several girls in my neighborhood who've been kidnapped and taken into sex trafficking. And so a big concern of mine is getting home safely. And so this girl never had the opportunity to explain why she had this pepper spray in her backpack, but she was issued a court citation because bringing pepper spray and mace was considered a zero tolerance rule. It was considered a weapon. And so really thinking more about the ways that we can prioritize honoring Black girls and their childhood in the discipline process. And a lot of that involves creating space to listen to them and listen to the conditions and circumstances around their discipline experiences. And the final recommendation from the girls is really the importance of addressing anti-Black racism, addressing gendered anti-Black racism, and fostering an intersectional practice lens. And Tiara shared that she felt that teachers could better support Black girls by, one, not stereotyping them. And she also felt that they needed more personal connections with adults. It doesn't have to be too personal, but I feel they should get to know us a little bit more, communicate and talk to us, and don't assume that we're acting up because something might be going on in our lives that they don't even know about. I mean, with Tiara, she had a very interesting narrative that led her to come up with this response, which was that she was a Black girl who was impacted by the child welfare system. And so she had been transitioned in and out of multiple foster homes. And she often reported that sometimes when she'd come to school after having a bad day in her home life, that she would be policed and surveilled by her teachers because she was perceived as having an attitude. And so in a recent book chapter, I wrote about this idea that Black girls aren't allowed to have bad days because of these controlling stereotypes that exist that frame Black girlhood and Black femininity as constantly angry, aggressive, and all of these other negative stereotypes that we see that portray Black women in these hostile ways, that Black girls are not allowed to come to school and exist in their emotions, and also that they're not comforted when they are coming to school and carrying these emotions, but rather that they are met by adults who are asking them questions about why they aren't submitting their assignments, or asking them about their facial expressions and attitudes and so forth. And so she really highlights this need to emphasize more of a relationship building component that would foster educators' ability to identify these challenges that are going on in a student's personal life. And so I want to go into just some more implications of my research and work with these girls. First is the importance of addressing anti-Black girlness in school discipline reform. We oftentimes are talking about anti-racism in ways that are not prioritizing intersectional lenses. And so it's really important that in the ways that we're approaching school discipline reform, that we are adapting a race conscious and gender analysis lens that is specifically examining the impact of anti-Black racism on the culture of discipline and punishment in school. And I argue that failing to do so without taking into consideration the ways in which anti-Black racism shapes the ideas, policies, and practices that are foundational to the school discipline will only create new structures and with old attitudes about Black girls. And I see this time and time again with schools that are implementing restorative justice, but haven't specifically engaged in the work of addressing anti-Black girl racism or addressing anti-Black racism, is that there is often a disproportionate representation of Black students who are being sent to restorative justice and these inclusive approaches to discipline. Next, my work really highlights the importance of centering Black girls' voices and expertise in research and reform. And I'll get into a little bit more of some of the approaches that can be used, but this includes participatory action research. It can also include surveys, focus groups, and creating leadership opportunities that Black girls are invited into, but also creating Black girl spaces that are facilitating healing for these girls. And to quote Micaiah, that these girls are looking for spaces in which they are provided the skill sets to resolve their conflicts with other students, but they're also looking for spaces to facilitate healing between them and their educator. Thinking about the kind that we are creating for Black girls that are grounded in their identities and that are allowing them the freedom to just talk and be themselves. And lastly, my work points to the importance of fostering an intersectionality as a practice. And this can include professional developments on positionality and intersectional oppression. And it can also include an increased focus on affirming Black girls' identities and fostering relationships with the reduced focus on punishment. And I read more about specific steps that educators and practitioners can use to implement an intersectionality lens in a forthcoming book chapter that I'm happy to share with everyone. But I give just a little bit of some example what it could look like here on this slide. Some of the activities that I use to foster an intersectional lens with the Black girls who I work with, but also to build community with Black girls, include regular well-being check-ins. And so one of my favorite activities that I use with the Black Girls of a Concrete Rose Project is a rosebud thorn check-in, where I ask the girls about the roses in their lives, the things that they are excited about and that they'd love to share, the buds, which are things that they are looking forward to in the forthcoming weeks, and the thorns, some of the challenges that they're experiencing in their personal lives that they to talk with me about, or might want to speak in community with other girls about their experiences. And so this is a worksheet template that I'd be happy to share with anyone who reaches out. I've provided my contact information in the chat box. I also engage in weekly community building circles, or sister circles, because I am working with all Black girls. I mean, these community building circles typically involve a guided discussion that can be by the girls. The girls come up with themes that they want to discuss or address, and each week we designate a time in the day in which we will engage in just an unstructured dialogue to build and foster community. Next, I engage in living history projects, and I shared on the slide with my methods some examples of living history projects that I've used, including educational journey maps, where the girls are sharing information about their families, their cultures, their values, and their past lived experiences that have shaped who they are as students today, and also their future aspirations that really allow us as educators to understand the ways that we can better support students in achieving the goals and aspirations that they envision for their own lives. And one of the first activities I introduce when I work with Black girls is the process of writing a self-definition poem. I included an example here of what my template looks like, but you can find self-definition poems, or IM poems, as they're called commonly on teacher resources, through any kind of teacher resource website. But it was really important for me to start out with writing these self-definitions, because what I found was that a lot of the girls were encountering very deficit narratives from their schools, from society. And so it was really important for me to allow these girls to introduce themselves in the ways in which they view as their strengths. And so the self-definition poem is actually one of the first activities that I use whenever I interact with girls of color or Black girls. And art creation and sharing. I've shared an example from our resident artist in the Concrete Rose Project, Micaiah, who has generously offered to really create so many different art pieces for our group. But I also engage the girls in the process of storytelling when they create art. We facilitate circles where the girls are sharing the art piece that they created, and also sharing about the meaning that they attribute to these art pieces that they've created. And then independent research. The girls were engaged in independent research of the project. Some of the girls had come up with questions that they wanted to ask their teachers. The other girls were engaged in conducting research about different experiences that they were describing, like around dress code, and coming up with other ideas to bring to the group. But it was really important to allow these to be student driven, and to really create space for students to think about what they would want to know more about their schools and other experiences. And then also I talk a little bit about the community needs survey. And especially right now during remote instruction, I think that the community needs survey is essential to just maintaining contact and fostering the relationship between the school and the community, between educators and the community, and really understanding what Black girls' needs are right now in this very unprecedented moment of remote instruction, where they are learning from home. How is remote instruction going for them? How are their families? What are their needs for support? And then I also think that listening to Black girls can look like offering opportunities for course feedback. In college, we are often invited to evaluate our courses at the end of the course term. But in high school, those opportunities are few and far in between. And so what could we do to incorporate more of Black girls' voices into the development of curriculum? Creating these opportunities for girls to share their input about the courses. One of the girls in the Concrete Rose Project group shared that she feels that she would benefit more from her Black history course that her high school provided if they found the contributions of Black women. She shared that they oftentimes focus on the contributions of Black male leaders, but there is this lack of recognition or visibility of Black women. And so really thinking about the ways that we can invite that kind of feedback into the classroom and allow it to shape the trajectory of our curriculum. And then I also think that listening to Black girls should entail inviting them to be on leadership councils and district youth advisory committees. And this, I always have to emphasize, is it's not just the Black girls who are already designated leaders, the Black girls who are involved in ASB, Associated Students, and other honors societies on campus, but it really involves the process of recruiting girls who might be perceived as academically disengaged or other terms that we use to describe Black girls who would non-traditionally be identified as leaders, and really tapping on them to be a part of these conversations and spaces. And then the final and most important to me is creating Black girl spaces. And I think of this really as in terms of Bell Hooks' concept of home places, which she describes as a space that Black women create to buffer the effects of white supremacy and all of these different oppressive structures that are within our institutions. And so when we think about the ways in which we can create counter educational spaces for Black girls that are centered on their identities and that really allow them to just be free and express their most authentic Black girlhood definitions. I think that is essential to how we can create spaces that are honoring Black girls and especially honoring their voices. As a closing, I want to lift up the words of Jane Baldwin, who writes that if one really wishes to understand how justice is administered in a country, one goes to the unprotected and listens to their testimony. As our conversations continue on the ways that we can advance equity, justice, and anti-racism in urban schools, we must listen to the voices and testimonies of the most unprotected and vulnerable. We must listen to Black girls and girls of color, and we must reimagine now and in the future the possibilities of school discipline reform efforts that are culturally responsive, intersectional, and that are led by Black girls and girls of color themselves, because they are the true experts of their daily realities and their needs. And in doing so, I want to offer as a closing offering a collective letter that was written by the Concrete Rose Girls in response to the prompt, what would you like your teachers and other adults to know about you? We want our teachers to know that we are more than just ghetto Black girls. You need to know your students and where they come from before stereotyping them. Some of us are loud and love to laugh. Some are shy. Some get distracted. But not everyone's the same, so don't assume you know us. There are things in life that can cause Black girls to act in a certain way. We might have an attitude and not express what we're feeling. We are human, and sometimes we do get upset. Be a mentor, leader, or someone to comfort us. Be there when we need you. Ask us why our homework didn't get turned in before you yell at us and assume that we have no potential. We try hard in your classes. Even when we don't understand, we always try. Take consideration of what you say because it truly matters and affects us. We are intelligent, beautiful, inspirational, devoted, independent, creative, loving, and too real. We are destined to become doctors, multi-billionaires, entrepreneurs, artists, and lawyers. We are determined to be greater than what society expects us to be because we are strengthened and empowered by our ancestors, our mothers, our future children, and ourselves. We are full of purpose and possibilities. We are the hidden roses. And I want to again thank the Cornwall Center so much for the invitation to present, and thank you all for joining. And now I'd like to transition into some questions and comments, but I also want to hold space in the chat box for anyone who wants to share any new ideas that you might have learned from the presentation, or any practices that you think that you want to implement to create spaces that honor Black girls' voices and that center them in the ways in which we are approaching school discipline reform and school climate.
Dr. Harris, hi, how are you? Are you hearing me?
Oh, yes, I can.
Okay, I just want to make a comment, two comments. Um, so one, I'm kind of going through the same thing right now with my daughter, and who's in a school where they're actually dealing with this situation with the teachers. And
Mm,
actually had a program where they brought in a vendor to talk to the students and the teachers. And basically, the mindset of the teachers need to change,
mm,
So it's the hiring practice. The administration of the school is hiring what type of teachers they're hiring, that literally, and I'm just going based on the experience I'm going through now. They're hiring teachers, or the teachers that have probably been there for 15, 20 years or 30 years. They're coming from different time periods.
mhm,
And because they're coming from different time periods, they're stuck in that time period the teacher grew up in, and they haven't transitioned with the current culture, the current mindset. They're stuck back from when they came through. So I just wanted you to know that I'm going through that myself, and I think schools need to think about the type of people they're hiring, and also kind of address the people that have been around for 30 years, the teachers that have been around for 30 years. Are these people up to date? Are they really reflective of the mindset of a multicultural society, a diverse society, a society that's trying to reform and be progressive? So that's the first comment. And the second time, real quick, I myself, you spoke about some of some of the attitude the teachers may have had towards some of the girls in terms of what they wear or how they dance, or they might think they're ghetto. So I'm from the 80s, and 80s is when hip hop music came out in early 80s, right? And I started high school in 1986. I could see how old I am. Sorry, in 1986. So in 1985, when I was in eighth grade, uh, these girls I used to hang out with, they were from Plainfield. They loved hip hop. They went and actually created their own rap song. Okay.
mm,
Um, so the school system we went to, it was in North Edison, which was predominantly Jewish and Italian at the time. There was only maybe 115, 120 Black students in the school. They went to the chorus teacher. They went to the chorus teacher to ask the chorus teacher if they could sing their hip hop song, present their hip hop song at the chorus festival that was going to
mm,
be taking place. And the
mm,
chorus teacher, now she was very dated back then. She couldn't believe that these Black girls who were originally from Plainfield, they moved to North Edison, had the nerve to come and ask her to sing to do a hip hop presentation in her chorus, her chorus festival. And the girls were very slighted because they created their own song. They practiced sound really good. They were doing the whole thing, the human beatbox, the whole thing. They were very, very upset. And, it's really strange because now it has transcend cultures since the 1985 experience to now. Where I live, I'm walking in the street, I'm seeing little white boys with music coming from their bicycles, and have speakers attached to their bicycles, playing hardcore rap music, hip hop music, riding down the street. And I said, wow, look at this. And I always think about that experience back in 1985 when the chorus teacher she couldn't believe that they even had the nerve to ask that question. So
mm.
that's my two comments, my two contributions.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Just appreciate your reflection. I find that every time I share my research, there is a Black woman who is inspired to reflect on her own experiences from her high school and or middle school experiences, but also reflects on their experiences of watching their daughter go through similar processes. And so I really just appreciate you inviting and bringing those narratives into the space because it's important. We now have language of how to identify those practices, but also really just highlighting the importance of cultural competence and in the ways in which we're approaching the development of practices and policies in schools. And so I really just appreciate you sharing those experiences. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Dr. Harris, I have a quick question, and it kind of piggybacks on the earlier comment. But in your research,
cutting out a little bit.
Oh, wow. In your research, do you notice any difference when teachers are teachers of color, when educators are women, when educators are younger? And after that question, I'll turn it over to Josh. He has a question afterwards.
Definitely. And so one of the interesting things that came up from the girls is that they oftentimes describe the quote unquote that teachers of color stereotype them in the same ways that their white educators stereotype them. And so I think that it really just calls out the importance of addressing not only anti-Black racism at the individual level, but at the system level, when we're thinking about how these actors of a school system that can be in many ways seeped in anti-Black racism are perpetuating anti-Black racism against Black girls. They can not only be non-Black educators of color, but even we are seeing in the girls' narratives these experiences in which Black educators are enforcing respectability politics and asking the girls to apologize for things that they shouldn't have to apologize. And so the girls were describing the importance of not only addressing it when this is their experience that they're having with a white educator, but they were also emphasizing that they were being stereotyped similar educators of color, Black educators as well, to address your question, Michael.
Dr. Harris, thank you. I'm really grateful to you for lifting up the girls' voices here for us. And I want to ask you, along with the anti-Blackness that the girls are facing in terms of what school expects disciplinarily, if they spoke to whether the schools tried the upper tiers, of the PBIS system, where they were trying to do therapeutic responses rather than punitive ones, but are just as anti-Black, right? And just as about now swapping out, maybe thinking of them as having a behavioral disorder, right? That's a whole new deficit label. And I wondered if the girls spoke to that in your work with them.
So the girls, thank you for your question, first of all. So the girls did not speak to PBIS at all in explicit ways. They talked about their school had a PBIS center that they were commonly referred to when they got in trouble in class. However, my research also involved conversations with adults. And so I got insight into the ways in which oftentimes when I spoke with adults, they were describing their perception of some of the challenges that were facing us girls due to the conditions of poverty in the community and due to some of the structural challenges that were facing families at the school. And I write about this a little bit in my work, is that the ways that they were describing it were often so very specific that they were creating these master narratives about the lives of Black girls outside schools that were framing their challenges in school as rooted in these very deficit ideas about the trauma and violence that was going on in their home lives. And so they were describing PBIS as a space that was responding to these different challenges. However, from the girl standpoint, PBIS was implemented in a way that was punitive rather than in a way that would have in any way been responsive to trauma or responsive to their social emotional needs. And so the narratives were very distinct. And even when I reported back the findings of my research to the school administrators, there was still some pushback that, we're addressing this because we've created PBIS as an intervention. But the girls had never experienced receiving an incentive card for demonstrating these different kinds of behaviors that are supposed to be rewarded. And they never had experienced the affirming aspects of PBIS. They had only really encountered the punitive aspects of it.
I appreciate that. Or spoke to how those the things that were being rewarded were effectively acting white. Right.
Definitely.
Right.
Wow. Yes. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you so much.
Thank you again so much. So my I'm a second year doctoral student, and my dissertation is actually going to be on Black girls in discipline, but I wanted to focus really on middle school because I see there's a lot of transition. So I noticed in general, middle school is a transition time. So, you know, elementary Black girls kind of get along. They go along to get along. They are more willing to kind of assimilate, whereas middle school is when they really start experiencing those discipline. They still really start having those discipline experiences because they're trying to find those, really kind of embracing their Blackness, and you know it becomes actually like a pushback. Things that I was curious about with to my issues are these experiences across socioeconomic statuses. Have you had any, have you done any research on what it looked like with a Black girl that's, you know, I know your study was at Title I, and that's a claim that, but I wonder, you know, would those Black girls' experiences be the same at a campus that was not Title or a campus that was predominantly white, and how experiences compare?
Thank you for your question, and I'm excited for your dissertation research. I shared my contact in the chat box, so if you want to connect further about that, I'd be excited to just offer any insight that I can. And so yes, my dissertation research, which is what I presented, was focused in on a Title I high school, but I have also experienced conducting research across schools of varying socioeconomic status. And in doing this work, I oftentimes will conduct focus groups specifically with Black girls. And the experiences and narratives are very similar and recurring. And in fact, I would say that in those school settings that are typically in more affluent, or as the girls would say, wider school districts, that there is even more of an emphasis on punishing girls for these behaviors that are considered to defy white notions of what is perceived as appropriate feminine behavior and what it means to act like a girl. But I also have a colleague who I'm co-writing a book with right now, who focuses specifically on middle school Black girls' experiences in predominantly white schools. And so I'd be happy to connect you with her as well. Her name is Ashley Smith, and she's at Providence College right now. I'm doing more research that is focused on that population. Thank you.
To that point, I would add also the context of integrating schools or integrating districts where a lot of this racial conflict really comes to the fore, and that's really based on the literature as well as personal experience. One of the things that I've observed in New Jersey in particular, just through my own kids' experiences, I have an 11-year-old daughter, and we went to an integrated district for about two years. Honestly, it became overbearing, the way how the conflict played out. In New Jersey, the harassment, intimidation, and bullying process is another way that I've experienced that, in addition to these additional suspensions and so forth, or another way in which the discipline process becomes a burden on students' lives and time. So they're in school. What I've observed is that it's come to fore that, often parents are using the HIB process to report incidences that are not even, to your research, not appropriately asked about, inquired about, voices aren't heard, right? But then this HIB process takes months. It's literally like a criminal investigation. And, the burden of kind of dealing with that as a family, wondering what's going to happen, being interviewed, being questioned. You're in school, but there's a major psychological burden to this experience, or it could be if it's not handled with fairness and sensitivity. You know, I really think some of those themes could be worth exploring in the context of the framework that you set out, Jamelia.
Definitely. Thank you so much for that, Bandine. And I see a question in the chat box from, I believe, Shaniqua Evans that I want to lift up. She asks, how can after school programs actively support school discipline reform as an outside entity? And first of all, I just want to affirm as a community-based educator who has worked mostly in after-school settings, that I view after-school settings as such an important site for engaging this work. With the Concrete Rose Girls, that was actually an after-school project that the girls were committing 2 to 3 hours bi-weekly to engage in this work. And so some of the ways in which I envision after school programs as supporting school discipline reform is first on the relationship building component, and really thinking about the ways in which we can create spaces that are allowing Black girls to self-define and really provide insight into who they are as students, and facilitating some of this information to their educators. But I also view after school project programs as a potential site of conducting further research alongside the girls. And so my own work as I introduce participatory in research as a way of engaging this kind of work, really position in that actual space as research partners who are investigating inequities that are facing their schools, and centering them and conducting their own research. And so my own way of approaching this has been to use that space to train girls in research that's and to really allow them space to just explore issues that are concerning them about. And I see another hand raised from Jewel.
Hi, good morning. I just wanted to say thank you. This was so affirming. Out of for over 20 years, had attended PUIs from grade school through college, and we were definitely policed more in high school for our uniforms versus our white counterparts. And also, I was diagnosed with lupus at a very young age. So being a little Black being with chronic illness, just hearing these other young girls say how their emotions were policed. They were not allowed to have a bad day. Living with chronic illness was the same. I'm not allowed to have low energy or not be super smiling and happy without being attacked by people at school and people in my family as well. So, I mean, this is a very important conversation. Schools to be having, and school administrators, but also within families, to know that, you know, Black girls need their space and to be able to express themselves fully, and no matter what environment, whether it's home, after school. A lot of the work that I do now, I own a well-being based business, and we teach yoga, meditation, and therapeutic art to help alleviate stress and race-based stress and trauma specifically. I've worked with Arts High School and American History High School in Newark and some other youth-led organizations here within the city. And you've given amazing ideas of programming that I can implement into the workshops that I do. So I just wanted to say thank you.
Thank you. And thank you so much for the work that you're engaging, and also for sharing your own personal reflection about your experiences. It's always just so powerful for this to be a space of just self-reflection for Black girls and women. I love that is what this presentation often brings up. And so I don't see any other questions in the chat box.
I think it's one question from Betsy.
Oh yeah. I was interested in the point that you made, Jamelia, about how we often assume that students who are disciplined are disengaged from school and their classwork, and but you found in your research that wasn't necessarily the case, and I just wanted to hear a little bit more about that.
Definitely. Definitely. So I had shared a bit about this sample of girls that I was working with, which is a mixture of honors track and regular track girls. And what was interesting was that when I reached out to the principal, supported me in recruiting these girls, I only asked, could you provide girls who have a reputation of being girls who get in trouble, or girls who have these various discipline experiences? And half of that sample of girls that he had referred to me had been girls that were involved in honors coursework. And the other half were girls that were involved in the regular track. And one of the interesting things that came out of that was that a lot of the girls that I had interviewed had very high aspirations for going on to college. And in conversation with adults, that I would ask them about their relationship with each of the girls that were in my dissertation research. And because these girls had these discipline reputations, the conversations with adults that I spoke to often centered around their behavioral challenges rather than centering around their academic capabilities. And so one example that I write a little bit about is Ashley, who was an 11th grade honor student in this, who shared the narrative that she believes that Black girls are punished more because they're viewed as threats. And when I spoke with her teacher after a classroom observation in which I had observed Ashley visibly being treated differently than a non-Black student, I spoke with her about her relationship with Ashley, and she immediately responded, she has potential, but too much attitude. And so she starts to list these different kinds of activities that Ashley is engaged in, and she's always on her cell phone. She has this flippant cheerleader attitude about her. This verbatim what she said to me. And she had described this very conventional narrative of a student who's disengaged. But what she didn't know about Ashley was that Ashley had recently been accepted to Yale for a college bridge program. And so she's telling me all of these deficit things about Ashley and the ways in which she is disengaged from her classroom, but she doesn't know this very significant milestone that is going on in Ashley's life. And she doesn't know that Ashley is actually a 4.0 honors student who is getting in trouble in her class because the class is very disengaging for her, that they had spent nearly 3 weeks watching the same documentary in this forensic class, and she wanted to be engaged more. And so it was this kind of disconnect between the teacher and Ashley. And so in my work, I say that oftentimes these kinds of racist and sexist stereotypes that educators can internalize about Black girls can blinder them from recognizing Black girls as academically capable and brilliant. And I find this to be a theme that came up consistently with a lot of the girls who even were regular track, that their educators weren't providing them information about colleges or other kinds of opportunities because they assumed that they wouldn't be interested in pursuing this for themselves based on a number of different interactions and experiences that they had.
Thank you.
I don't think there are any more questions in the chat, but Dr. Harris, I really want to thank you so much for such a wonderful presentation. It was very informative, and really looking forward to more opportunities to hear from you in the future as you continue your academic pursuits, particularly some of the references you made to some of the writings that you're doing. I know a lot of people in the chat express interest in staying in contact with you and learning more from you as you do this important work. As we wind down, I would just like to bring to everyone's attention that, of course, our professional development series for May and June will continue on the theme that Dr. Harris started us out with, looking at girls of color. So we're really excited about an upcoming presentation on June 3rd. So we ask that you continue to join us during our presentation. And Dr. Harris, I'll turn it back over to you for any words of wisdom or any lasting comments that you want to make before we close out.
But I, again, just want to extend my deepest gratitude to the Cornwall Center for thinking up a series of this kind of that is taking on this kind of an intersectional lens. And just my experience is it's very uncommon to see that language that is specifically centering and honoring the voices and experiences of girls and color. And so I really am just excited to be a part of this series. And I also want to thank everyone here who is present and who shared their experiences or shared their reactions and ideas around my presentation. And again, to invite you to reach out to me. I've shared my contact information in the chat box, as well as my personal website and Twitter handle. And I know that they'll be sharing the recording of this presentation. And so if you have any follow-up questions or ideas that you want to balance out, I'd be happy to engage in further conversation.